Hello, I'm Craig Constantine. Welcome. This is the Podcaster Community Show, short conversations that are not just about podcasting because I like to take the scenic route. My guest today is Doug Thompson. Welcome, Doug. How are you?
I am well, Craig. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. I say this all the time. People are fast forwarding. I love that people take the time to be like, I don't know, I'll try a half hour with Craig. And I think it speaks a lot toward everybody's interest in good conversation, that they're willing to just, like, if I had said to you, yeah, let's do a 4 hour call, then maybe you'd be a little more reticent to click the button. But when you offer somebody a short opportunity to try something bite size, with maybe the carrot on a stick lure of, I promise it'll be a good conversation, that tends to make people jump. And I'm just wondering, if I understand correctly, you have a background from the early days in radio. I'm going to say the early days, like, early days of the internet radio. And
Yeah, it was very early days for some
I mean, you
here.
didn't work for Marconi, right? But it was like, but
Oh yeah, yeah. No,
but
I'm a little bit younger than that.
where did you first realize that storytelling was something that you were really into? Was that in radio, or did you develop skills in radio and then you realized it when you got into podcasting, or was it in sales? Like, where did conversation really become a thing that you were aware of that you were good at?
Well, the key is aware. So conversation, I was naturally drawn to. And again, since I was in the days before text messaging, and we went through all the iterations of it, of pagers, of the bag phones, of these other things that we went through. So I went through all those different things. And when I started in radio, it was somewhat of it was a lark, in that they had a contest. The morning DJ had a contest for a sports person to come on. So you just simply call in and audition, and they would pick a winner, and you do this. And I was like, well, hey, I like sports. I like to have fun. Why not? I've always been sort of somebody that there's a challenge. This sounds interesting, right? And so I called in. I did the sports thing, and it was very it was not like the professional ones that you see now. It was more like a Saturday Night Live skit of a sportscaster that went on, but it played
But
well.
that can be really good on radio, right?
It really was. I mean, for the morning, you want a little bit lighthearted. You don't want any serious topics in the morning, and it sort of fit that bill. So I got on, and so I did the morning sports. It was a 15-minute hit there as it started, and then I got to do some remotes, and then I got to do some um, uh, remotes. And actually was the color guy on doing high school football, and I was a color commentator.
Mm.
The guy was doing play by play, and so it all sort of evolved through these things. I again, going back to when I would go in, and you can appreciate this from an editing audio standpoint. We had reel to reel tape, and I had to go ahead and cut it with a razor blade and splice things together.
Right.
There's no Audacity or anything like that where you could digitally just wipe things out. I had to go in and do these things, and it was a learning experience that went on. So I appreciate the ability to sort of highlight and delete and tune and these other things we have now. So that was that, and I did that for a couple of years. But I realized there's a couple of things I realized. One, that whoever wrote WKRP actually came from a radio station, because all those characters exist.
I
Right?
heard you say that on another show, right? This is real, slightly
Yeah,
magnified, but no, real.
yeah, and two, that it was somewhat of you had to be somewhat of a nomad to sort of, because you went from small markets to go on and all these, and I couldn't really do that to my family, so I stuck with my day job and just sort of wrote it off for a bit. And then I got into tech sales and sales nerdery, as I like to call it. And I got really good at it. I did these quarterly briefings where I would record it on a DVD. This is when I worked for Microsoft, and I record it was like a half hour chat. It was like a little a Tonight Show. I'd interview people, talk about the products, do different things, and I've shipped DVDs around which is an interesting concept to people who grew up with the internet. So they couldn't imagine me shipping DVDs. Why did you do that? Well, we had
They
dial-up.
used to mail us AOL, right? AOL used to show up in the mail.
I was really happy when I had the 33K speed on the dial-up. That was the winner. And then I did a video about training and explaining a very complex process they had to go through, and we ended up reprinting that 3 times. And so we went through that phase, and then we were interviewing for somebody for my position, a similar position to mine. which was again tech sales, and we went through like 30 candidates. My manager at the time just sort of turned to me and said, look, we can't find anybody. We need to clone you because you have the ability to tell a story. And it was that at that moment, as I sat and tried to digest what she was saying, that I realized that what I did, it didn't necessarily come naturally, but I did it unconsciously. I was sort of attracted to talking to people, and as I went through my career, I found that people related to stories. And I liked reading when I was a kid, and I liked the Hardy Boys and different things like that. That again, dating myself, but I said, oh, I this is a unique skill that I have, and then about a year or so later, I went back to a high school reunion. We count it in decades, so I don't go tell you what that was, but they had some memorabilia in different things from the class time. This was back in the late 70s, and there was a note there. It was a tardy slip that said, had my name on it. I wrote it out, and I said, a Coke truck dropped all the Cokes on the freeway and blocked traffic, and that's why I was late. And it was approved, by the way. Good thing they didn't have it. They didn't have Twitter and stuff to actually check on these things now. But I realized at that time I've told stories all my life, and just sort of did it unconsciously. So that's where I sort of directed into it. How can I keep this storytelling going, and how can I do so? I've done some, I did some segments on LinkedIn where I do Mindset Monday and do a little video type thing, and then I said, okay, let's do this podcasting thing. And so I've been doing that for about 4 seasons now. I also do the company podcast. I'm the host for that, and I do some guest hosting on some others. So I really like the conversation piece of that, and what I really like is the stories that sort of develop from a conversation.
There's definitely a knack in conversation. So when you're telling stories, I don't want to like say you're doing it because you want attention, but when you're telling stories to be interesting and funny, or to share an emotion with someone, then there's the next level up, which is when you're figuring out what is the story that this other person, I'm going to say, needs to hear. Like if you're in tech sales, you're also trying to like, what's the story that I can tell them that would correlate with the thing we'd like to sell you. But do you like recall the point where you saw that as a difference, and maybe like how you were able to, I don't want to say weaponize it, but like turn it into a tool. So now, there's lots of stories I can tell. I can tell a funny anecdote. I can tell a leap on the sword story, or I can try to figure out what is the thing that these people don't see that they need, and craft that story. Like, do you remember when you were able to first deploy that as a tool?
Well, again, it started unconsciously as I would sort of adapt stories. And really, in the background in technology with a specific product, you may only have 4 or 5 different stories, but you put a different spin on it that fits the customer situation that they need. Because in the end, technology, whether I'm in education, I'm government, I'm in high tech, I'm in pharma, or whatever, the technology is sort of fixed in what it does. You can customize and sort of tweak it on the end to sort of fit that specific workflow. But I will use the language for, like I said, if I'm in education, I have to use education language to describe something that somebody in pharma would not understand what I'm talking about, even though I'm talking about the same thing, right? So it's almost like I'm a translator to sort of put it in the language that they're familiar with. When I consciously did that was probably about 6 or 7 years ago. It was, what was I doing? Again, after I sort of said, oh, I've got a unique skill here. I need to help other people tell stories. I started mentoring a lot of people back when I was at Microsoft on the same thing. Is okay, let me distill. So it's a little bit of the homework of what am I doing, being conscious about what am I doing, and where's that it's at. I mean, it wasn't an aha moment. Nobody pointed it out. It was just something as I'm trying to hone the craft. What am I doing that it seems to be working? What am I doing that's not? What can I do?
Do you ever get to situations where you're talking with someone, maybe not necessarily in a sales capacity, but like in a technical area, and the story in my head can sometimes be, yeah, that's too complicated for me to explain. And like, how do you walk the line between, just saying, the wizard behind the curtain says that's not a thing, just, ignore it, and like trying to actually figure out if they want to learn, the like teach a man to fish versus give them a fish.
Yeah.
Like, how do you walk the line between saying like, oh, here's the fish, go away. The answer is no, it doesn't work. Versus like, all right, well, this is going to take a lot of time here, but I think this person wants to learn to
Mhm.
fish. And like,
Yeah.
how do you like walk that line and make those decisions? Like, what are the things you
Uh,
look for in them, or the things that you see that are indicative?
well, there's a couple. So there's a couple gotchas there. One of them, when I'm walking in a room, if I'm talking to the business people and all the other things, then I know the level is going to be about 50 to 100, maybe 150 of technology. That's the discussion level. Perfect. Now I get into a bunch of engines. So we've gotten past that part. They want the engineers to look at it. I almost immediately go up and say, look, I am not the smartest person in this room, but I do know who to call that is much smarter than I am to answer your questions.
I'm the guy with the Rolodex back in the day, right?
Exactly. So I try to just set the stage, that if it's a really deep conversation about these things, I'm a bit of a polymath, which sort of really works to my advantage, and that I have a bunch of different interests so that I can find some common ground with somebody. I actually call this starting the story where the listener is, where the audience is. Being that, okay, I do a little LinkedIn stalking or a little other things to get a little background information about either what they're familiar with or what their industry is familiar, what the problems are facing with these other things, and then try to start a story again. Putting the framework around the core message in a language and it could be, look, I was talking to a customer, I read a story, I read these other things, a sort of introduction that says, okay, the listener, okay, he understands sort of where I'm at. And then I will go, and sometimes I can use the eyes glassing over as I'm getting too deep, or
Right.
they're on their phone, they're
Fell
doing
over.
something
Yeah.
else that you've
Mm.
lost them, right? So you have to sort of constantly monitor the conversation, the body reactions of what's going on before you go on. Because sometimes I've gotten a little too deep. I have to say, look, we sort of gotten off in the weeds here a little bit. Let me get back, and you have to reset things. So there's no hard and fast rule for it because everybody's feedback of when we reach that glass over moment is different. But
Mm.
the reactions you have as a human, we all have similar reactions. We get distracted, we go do something else. They fall asleep, something like that.
Sometimes I wonder, can everybody tell a story? Like, it seems to me like storytelling is so, um, I don't know if it's physiologically deeply rooted or we just get so steeped in it, from infancy on that everybody learns how to do it, but some people don't know they know how to do it. Like, is it really true? I'm wondering, can everybody tell a story, or is it like some people, they're just missing a skill set?
Yeah. Well, Lisa Cron wrote a book, Wired for Story, where she talks about the brain. And I did my TED talk on this as well, is the brain is wired to comprehend stories. And the reason being, and I was interviewing somebody just a couple of weeks ago for the podcast, and she gave a point in her TED talk that you get like 1 million inputs. I forget, it was a bigger number than that at a time. Your brain can handle about 100.
Right.
So we have to go to the subconscious where we're doing. This is where story comes in because it starts involving emotions. It makes it more memorable. So I started my TED talk giving off a number, and then I started telling a story. And then after that, I got to the end of it. Like, now, can you remember the number that I told you? One person out of all the times I've done that has been able to tell that, but everybody else says, no, I can't remember. But they can remember the stories that I told.
Hmm.
This is sort of, you have that connection. So the brain's wired to receive information that way from one point. So you can tap into it. They get that. Now, the telling of stories is, I think it's a skill you need to build. We have the capabilities of doing that, but sometimes it gets overloaded with everything else. When the technology, I think, is to a large extent, is sort of destroyed that aspect, and now everything's 60 characters or whatever. It's a tweet, it's a thought, it's something, right? It's not really a story.
It has a bell
When I
attached
was
and
a
it's
kid,
brightly colored, right?
yeah, as a kid, that's how we communicated, was talking to each other, and we'd tell stories, and we'd lie about this or we'd exaggerate, but that you talk to people and you had that art. And now anymore, I think we don't teach and we don't invest in the children and adults and stuff to learn to tell. So yeah, you can learn. Your level of success, I think, will be limited somewhat about your experiences and stuff that you have. But yeah, I think everybody can learn to tell at least a rudimentary story. I really liked. I grew up with Paul Harvey, and would tell the rest of the story in the back. And every day at 5 o'clock, I'd be there to sort of listen to that. So I love that. And then Mike Rowe came up telling things with the way I heard it, and they're just great. It's I'm attracted to stories and the way people tell them and the things that go on, even more than books, because when you have the voice and you have the different inflection, you have all these different tools that you can use. It's really an art form.
Yeah, there's so much more content that you have access to in audio,
Mhm.
which a lot of people talk about the magic of radio, and it's really the magic of audio.
Mhm.
As you were talking and you mentioned, I'm known for having a soapbox about social media. I promise I'm not standing on it. I won't get on it. But I'm curious about your thoughts on, just occurred to me that if people are, I don't want to like overgeneralize, but if people are living in their phone or living in their computer, and a lot of us got this done to us for the last 2 years, and I'm just thinking there's a piece that you're missing. So you can't actually, well, maybe a really good storyteller could, but you can't really tell a story through Twitter or through even like a text email. And when you mentioned the difference between books and listening to the radio is what struck me. And I'm just trying to imagine, like, how do you encourage people who maybe you and I see as like, whoa, you have the storytelling biology or the storytelling
Mhm.
hard wetware, but like, how do you encourage them to like take the chance of putting the phone down and maybe going to a social event, in places where that's safe to do? But like, how do we encourage them to go show up for storytelling? Is it go find an improv class? Is it go volunteer at your local radio station? Is it jump on live interactive calls like this? Or
Yeah.
what's the
That's an
access
interesting.
gateway?
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it like that way. Yeah, you did mention improv classes, and that's an important part of storytelling. In that, I took the entry level, and I'm actually going through another improv class right now with a mentor of mine. And the main thing, there's a couple of things that it teaches you, and this is the one thing that's a skill for me when I'm out in sales, is ability to listen, and not just listen on the surface.
Hmm.
It's listening to what they're telling you, what they're going on, and then doing the number one rule in improv is yes and. So taking what they're saying, and here's how we can solve that problem. Not that, because sometimes inside that there's a better way to accomplish what they think what you think they're trying to tell you. That doesn't matter, right? No, that's a yes, but it's a yes and. Okay, yeah, we can do that, and over time you can evolve to go on. But it's the ability to listen, to really connect with that person, to understand where they're coming from, what their worries are, what their things are. That's some great tools, and then sort of the structure of a story. But to get them to go on, I anybody that's sort of an aspiring speaker or presenter that I work with, I say, look, go take an improv class. If you're in tech sales, go take an improv class, because if you're up presenting, you've always got somebody out there's going to toss a question that's not on the talk track, right? And then how do you respond to that? How do do you say, oh, I can't answer that? Go on. Do you let it totally derail you,
Right.
or
Even
do you
their
look at it as an
interactions that you pick up visually, like you look on the audience, you're like, no, they're all glassing over. This is not landing. That's literally improv would teach you how to
they're
like,
telling you.
and left. Yeah.
So yeah, so that it is yeah, I all those things that you mentioned are great. Get on a podcast with somebody, get on any chance you have to sort of get in front of a group of people. Take Toastmasters,
Hmm.
do something like that.
That's a good point. I've heard that mentioned a lot. I've never done Toastmasters, but I've heard that mentioned a lot. And I've heard a lot of people have really good things to say about, I'm going to say, being pushed in the pool.
Yeah,
Welcome to Toastmasters. This is your first day at Toastmasters. You have to
yeah,
turn in
I
the Fight
know.
Club.
I've got a couple of good friends that really, I mean, some of them lead the group. Somebody I just released a podcast episode for in Canada, she leads the group. I for me, I wasn't a good fit. And I'm sure I did learn some things from it, but for me, I wasn't a good fit for it. That's
Hmm.
not that the program is bad. That's the program, like anything else, it's not a fit for everybody. And
Right.
those shoes were just a little tight for me.
That's a compliment. That's a compliment to the program. If the program is
Yeah.
specific enough to serve a certain set, then that's a
Yeah.
good sign.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm watching our time fly by, and we haven't said a single thing about any of your shows or anything. So, if people are interested, where can they get in touch with you or find out more about what you're currently working on, or how would you like them to reach out to you?
Sure. I am the Doug Thompson on all those hateful social media platforms. Anybody could be a Doug Thompson, but I want to be the Doug Thompson. So LinkedIn is where I'm most active, but I'm on Twitter and Instagram as well. I have my podcast, which is the Doug Thompson podcast. I'm gonna be changing it up a little bit here in the fall, so stay tuned. There's a little brand change there. I do the company podcast. I work at Tanium. I work the podcast there, and just I'm just around. So I'm gonna try to be a little bit more active in the community here. Thanks for inviting me here. I like to talk to like-minded people and people that necessarily aren't necessarily like-minded. That's fun too.
Cool. All right. Well, as I said at the beginning, thanks so much for taking the time to join me. It's a distinct pleasure to, actually get to spend some time, not on a Hollywood Squares type call and chat and talk about conversation. So thanks so much, Doug.
Thanks for having me.